I'm Maren Whitfield, 49 years old, and I spent 27 years as a Marine building something my own family never believed was real. For years, I was the quiet engine that held them up, the one who paid the bills and drove the long roads and answered every crisis, while they called me the dog lady and laughed. But when a young sentry pulled me out of line at the gate of my own base, and the truth finally walked across the lane on 4 legs, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you are tuning in from. And if you have ever had to stand up for yourself after being dismissed, hit that like button and subscribe. In my father's house, the word Marine meant exactly one thing, and it did not include me. It meant a rifle and a trench and a line company moving up a hill in the dark. It meant the things he had done in his 20s and the things his friends had done beside him. And everything else was support. And support was a polite word for people who carried the coffee. I learned that creed at the dinner table, the way other children learn grace before a meal. By the time I was 11, I could have recited it. There's the core, and there's everybody who keeps it comfortable, and you do not confuse the two. My father was a sergeant major when most of my friends' fathers were still learning their own jobs. Russell Whitfield had 30 years of infantry behind him. 2 wars, a back that clicked when he stood, and a certainty about the world that never once wavered in my presence. He was not a cruel man. I want to be careful about that because it would be easier to tell this story if he had been. He coached my softball team. He fixed my bicycle. He cried at his own mother's funeral in a way I had never seen him cry about anything. But when it came to what a person was worth, he had one ruler, and the ruler had been issued to him in 1968, and he never thought to ask whether it measured everything. I wanted to be a Marine before I understood what I was choosing. I think I wanted it because it was the one currency my father respected, and a daughter will do a great deal to be respected by the first man she ever tries to please. What I did not expect was that wanting it would not be enough. When I told him at 17 that I was going to college on a path toward a commission, he nodded slowly, the way he nodded at weather reports, and then he asked which kind of officer I intended to be. I said military police. The kitchen got very quiet. He turned back to the sink and said, "Well, somebody has to write the tickets." That was the whole conversation. He did not yell. He did not forbid it. He simply filed me in that moment into the category of people who keep the Corps comfortable. And he never refiled me, not for 27 years, not until a dog made him do it in front of a crowd. I was commissioned a 2nd lieutenant in the spring of 1999, 22 years old, my whole future folded up inside a brand new uniform. My father came to the ceremony in his old dress blues, which still fit him, which he was quietly proud of. When it was done, he shook my hand. Not hugged. Shook, like I was a junior Marine he was greeting at a change of command. He said, "Military police, well, and let the sentence die there, because we both already knew the end of it." My mother cried and told me I looked beautiful. My little brother Hayden, 17 and bored, asked if I got a gun. That was my commissioning, a handshake, a half sentence, and a teenager asking about hardware. I could tell you that it did not hurt, but I have promised myself that I would tell this straight. It hurt. It hurt the way a stone in your shoe hurts, not enough to stop you, just enough to remind you with every step that something is wrong and you are choosing to keep walking anyway. So I kept walking. I went where the Corps sent me. I learned my trade. And somewhere in my 2nd year at a base kennel I had no real reason to visit, I met the thing that would become my whole life. There was a working dog there, a German shepherd named Falk, old and grizzled and serious, and I watched his handler put him through a search. I watched that dog move down a line of crates with an attention so total it was almost frightening, and then stop and sit and stare at one crate as if it had personally offended him. Inside the crate was a training aid, a scent the dog had been taught meant danger. Falk had found in 9 seconds what a room full of trained Marines would have taken an hour to find, and he had done it for a rubber toy and a word of praise. I stood there and felt something in my chest rearrange itself. 2 years later, deployed, I saw it stop being a game. I watched a young dog named Cooper alert on a patch of road that looked like every other patch of road, and I watched an ordnance team pull a buried charge out of the dirt that would have killed the 4 Marines' walking point. Nobody wrote a song about Cooper. Nobody back home would have counted him as the real core. But 4 men went home to their families because an animal loved his handler enough to do an impossible thing for a kind word, and I stopped trying to win my father's argument that day. I had found my hill. It just happened to have a kennel on it. I want to be honest about what that work actually was, because the dog lady joke depended on nobody knowing. A military working dog is not a pet that happens to wear a vest. It is an investment of years and tens of thousands of dollars and the patience of a dozen people. An animal capable of detecting a few molecules of a substance no machine we own can reliably find. An animal that will walk willingly into the place a human is afraid to go because its handler asked it to. The bond between a good dog and a good handler is one of the truest things I have ever witnessed in any uniform. And it is built the same way the Corps builds everything that matters, through repetition and trust and 1,000 bad days that nobody sees. I gave my 20s and my 30s to learning how to build that bond at scale. How to take a wild young animal and a nervous young Marine and turn them into a team that could clear a route or find a missing child or stand a gate that strangers passed through every hour of every day. It was real work. It was hard work. And it was invisible to the exact people I most wanted to make proud, which is a particular kind of loneliness that I carried quietly for a very long time. The years went on the way years do. I made first lieutenant, then captain. I was good at my job and then I was very good at it. And the whole time, I was also the quiet engine of my family, though none of them would have described me that way. When Hayden wanted to go to school and the money was not there, I sent it. When my father's pension came up short one bad winter, I covered the gap and told my mother it was a refund I had not expected. When there was a funeral, a wedding, a surgery, a crisis, I was the one who drove the 12 hours and organized the casseroles and handled the paperwork nobody else wanted to read. I gave and gave the way you give to people you are still trying to convince to love you a particular way. And in return, I was the dog lady. That is what I became at the family table, somewhere in those years, a nickname that started as a joke and hardened into a fact. I was the one who played with the animals on base. I was the daughter with the strange little job that nobody quite understood and nobody bothered to ask about. I let it happen. I told myself it did not matter what they called me as long as I knew what I had built. I was wrong about that, but it would take a long time and a long drive and an old dog leaving his post before I understood how wrong. The work itself, the work they reduced to a punchline, was the work I was proudest of in my entire career. By the time I made major and landed at Camp Lejeune in the year 2010, I had spent more than a decade learning everything there was to know about military working dogs, and I walked into a program that was dying. The kennel at Lejeune had been neglected for years. The runs were failing, the budget had been bled to nothing. There were 3 handlers left, and all 3 were burned out, working broken hours with broken equipment, watching good dogs age out with no replacements coming. Most officers would have written a memo recommending the program be consolidated somewhere else and moved on to a better assignment. I looked at those failing runs and those tired handlers and those good old dogs, and I decided I was not going to be the officer who signed the death certificate. I was going to rebuild it. I did not fully understand what I was promising. If I had, I might have been wiser. I am glad I was not. I learned to write a grant request the way my father had learned to clear a trench, methodically, under pressure, with no expectation of thanks. I begged funds from every line item I could reach. I drove to other installations and learned how they ran their kennels. I rewrote the training program from the studs. For 2 years, I lived in that kennel more than I lived in my own quarters, and slowly, run by run and dog by dog, the program came back to life. New construction, new handlers who wanted to be there. A standard of training that other bases started sending people to observe. Nobody at home noticed. My father, when I called, asked whether I had thought about getting back to a real billet before my career stalled out. There were nights in those 2 years when I sat in the kennel office at 0200 hours doing paperwork by a desk lamp because there was no one else to do it. With a sick dog in the medical run that I did not want to leave alone. And I would think about quitting. Not the Corps. The fight, the endless, thankless fight to convince a system to keep something alive that the system had already decided to let die. I could have transferred to a comfortable billet, padded my record, made my father a little prouder by chasing the kind of job he understood. Instead, I stayed in a failing kennel and rebuilt it run by run, because every time I was ready to give up, I would walk down the line and a dog would put its head against the chain link and look at me with a trust I had not earned yet. And I could not be the person who walked away from that. I learned in those years that the things worth building are almost never the things that get you noticed while you are building them. You build them anyway, or you do not, and that choice is the whole measure of a person, no matter what anyone calls you at a dinner table 400 miles away. In the fall of 2014, the rebuilt kennel certified its first puppy under the new program. He was a Belgian Malinois, a lean, gangly, tan and black thing with ears too big for his head and an engine that never idled, and nobody else wanted him because he was, in the kindest professional language, a handful. I took him, I fostered him through his first months myself, in my own quarters, and I certified him with my own hands, and I named him Argo, after the ship that carried heroes to the far edge of the map and brought them home. Argo decided I was his before he could climb a single obstacle on the training course. He imprinted on me the way young Malinois do, completely, permanently, with no apparent capacity to reconsider. 12 years later, he had not changed his mind. I did not know, that fall, that the most important thing I built in 27 years of service was not a kennel or a program or a reputation. It was the trust of one animal, and that trust would outlast my father's doubt, outlast the family joke, and one spring morning it would walk 12 feet across a guarded lane and lean its whole weight against my legs in front of every person whose respect I had spent my life trying to earn. The joke arrived at a cookout, the way these things do. It was the summer of 2014. Argo was a few months into his training, and I made the mistake of talking about him with actual enthusiasm. I described how he had learned a new search pattern, how smart he was, how far he was going to go. My brother Hayden, by then a grown man with a salesman's instinct for the room, watched my father's face go flat, read the temperature, and said, "Careful what you feed her. She will start doing tricks for it." Everybody laughed. Even I laughed, because that is what you do when you are the only one not laughing and you do not want to make it worse. The dog lady. It was so easy. It explained me in 3 words to neighbors and cousins and my father's old Marine buddies, none of whom had to do the harder work of understanding what I actually did. My father took to introducing me with it. "This is my daughter," he would say to someone at a barbecue. "She plays with the dogs on base." And I would smile and shake the hand and correct no one, because correcting him would have meant a scene, and I had been raised to believe that keeping the peace was a kind of strength. I know better now. Keeping the peace and keeping your place are not the same thing, and I had spent years confusing one for the other. It was not only the nickname, it was the steady, frictionless assumption that whatever I was doing could not be serious, layered over the equally steady assumption that whatever the family needed, I would provide. Hayden called me the dog lady at his own wedding in a toast to laughter. I had paid for nearly half of that wedding. I sat at the head table and laughed along and did not say a word, and I told myself that was Grace. Looking back, I think it was just fear wearing Grace's uniform. The program I built kept growing while my family's picture of me kept shrinking, and the gap between those two things got wider every year. By 2015, I had made lieutenant colonel, and the kennel at Lejeune was considered one of the best on the East Coast. Handlers requested it. Young Marines enlisted, hoping to end up there. The dogs we trained went to places I was not allowed to talk about, and did things that saved lives no statistic would ever credit to us. In 2016, the Corps moved me on, the way the Corps does. Okinawa, then Quantico, then a series of billets that took me further from the kennel and higher in rank. Before I left Lejeune, we held a small ceremony to hand the program over to the senior NCOs, who would run it now, the people I had trained to keep it alive, without me. I invited my family. None of them came. There was a folding chair with a paper sign that had my name on it, and nobody sitting in the row behind it. And I stood at a podium in front of my Marines and the dogs and the handlers, and I was proud, and I was alone in equal measure. A young sergeant stood in the front rank that day, a serious man named Desmond Frawley, who had come up under me and absorbed everything I taught him like the kennel was a religion, and I was the one who had handed him the book. Argo, 2 years old then, lay at the edge of the formation with his eyes locked on me the entire time, the way he always did, certain that I was the most important fact in any room I occupied. I did not know that 10 years later that same sergeant would be a sergeant major, and that same dog would be gray in the muzzle and still standing the gate, and that the two of them together would be the ones to finally make my family see me. I just knew that morning that I had built something real, and that the people I most wanted to show it to had not bothered to come and look. I drove off Lejeune that week with a kennel in my rearview mirror that did not need me anymore. That is the highest thing you can say about anything you build. It outlives your hands on it. I told myself that was enough. For 10 years, I made it be enough. The Corps invited me back in the spring of this year. The program I had rebuilt from a chain link run and a borrowed budget had finally earned a new home. A full kennel complex with proper facilities, classrooms, a veterinary suite, everything I had once begged and scrounged for. They were going to dedicate it, and because I had founded the modern program, they wanted me there to be recognized. A brigadier general would host it. There would be a formation, a ceremony, a stone with words cut into it. After 27 years, the institution I had given my life to was going to say my name out loud in front of people and mean it. I made 2 mistakes. The first was inviting my family. The second was arriving in civilian clothes. I told myself the invitation was generous, that I was giving them a chance to finally see what I had done. The truth was simpler and sadder. Some part of me, the 11-year-old at the dinner table, still wanted my father to watch a crowd respect me because I had never quite stopped believing that his respect was the only kind that counted. So I called home and I invited them, and to my surprise, they said yes, all 3 of them. My father 78 now and slower, my mother 75, my brother 44, and still selling things to strangers for a living. We would drive down together. It would be, I imagined, a kind of healing. The drive was 4 hours, and the joke survived all 4 of them. Somewhere on the highway, Hayden, riding up front, twisted around in his seat and said, $20 as the dog lady gets us lost on her own base. My father chuckled from the back. My mother said, "Oh, Hayden," in the tone she used that scolded nobody. I kept my eyes on the road and my hands at 10 and 2 and said nothing, because I was 49 years old and a colonel in the United States Marine Corps, and I had still not learned how to be defended at my own family's table, not even by myself. I had my identification in my bag instead of in my hand, which is a small thing that turned out to matter. I was in slacks and a blouse, comfortable for the drive, a woman in her late 40s who looked like anybody's aunt heading to a graduation. There was nothing about me that morning that announced what I was. I had spent my life letting people decide I was smaller than I am, and I had dressed without meaning to for exactly that. We reached the main gate a little before 10. There was a line of vehicles, the usual morning flow, and Marines working the lane with the brisk, impersonal efficiency I had helped train into this very installation. One of them, a young lance corporal, very correct, very sure of himself, waved our car aside and signaled for me to step out for secondary screening. His name, I would learn, was Pryor. He was 20 years old. He had been alive for 1 fewer year than the program I built. He barely looked at me. That is the part I remember most clearly. Not rudeness exactly, just the complete, casual certainty that I was no one he needed to see. "Step out of line, ma'am," he said. "You have been selected for secondary." And behind me, from the open car window, my brother's voice, delighted, carrying. "Told you," Hayden said. "They do not just let anyone walk onto a real base." I stepped out of the car. I stepped aside to the spot the lance corporal indicated, and I put my hands loosely at my sides and I waited. I had taught 1,000 Marines how to wait at a checkpoint without losing their dignity, how to be thorough without being cruel, how to be stopped without being shrunk. I could spare myself the same courtesy. So I stood there, calm, in the spring sun, the family failure selected for secondary, while my brother enjoyed it from the car, and my father said nothing, and the lance corporal turned his attention to my bag. And then, 20 feet away, working the vehicle lane, a dog stopped. I did not see it happen so much as feel the air change. The working dog on the lane that morning was old, gray through the muzzle, moving with the careful economy of an animal who has done a job for a very long time. He was checking vehicles with his handler, a young corporal, both of them in the rhythm of it. And then the dog froze. He lifted his head. He turned, away from the cars, away from his work, toward me. And for 1 second he was completely still in the way that only a working dog can be still. Every part of him pointed at a single fact. Then he came. He came so fast and so hard that he hauled his handler clean off balance, dragging the young corporal 12 feet across the lane by the lead. And he did not stop until he reached me, and he pressed the entire weight of his body against my legs and leaned, the way he had leaned on me as a puppy in my quarters, and he would not move. He pushed his gray muzzle into my hand, and he leaned, and he made a sound I had not heard in 10 years, low and broken and overjoyed. And I went down on one knee, right there at the gate in my civilian slacks, and put my arms around an old dog's neck. The handler was white-faced, hauling uselessly at a lead that meant nothing now. He has never left his post, the corporal said. To no one, to everyone. He has never left his post, not once. Argo did not check my identification. He did not need to. He had certified me a long time before any Marine at that gate ever could, and his certification did not expire. The Lance Corporal had stopped going through my bag. He was staring at the dog, and at me on the ground with the dog, and something was beginning to happen in his face, the first cold edge of an understanding he did not want. And across the gate, walking over to deal with whatever had disrupted his lane, came a sergeant major, a big, serious man in his 50s, and he was 3 steps away and opening his mouth to restore order when he saw my face. He stopped. I watched it land on him the way it had refused to land on anyone else that morning. His spine changed, his whole bearing changed, and Sergeant Major Desmond Frawley, who had been a young sergeant in my front rank the day I drove off this base 10 years before, came to attention in the middle of the lane and said, in a voice that carried, "Gate, attention. Colonel Whitfield, ma'am, I am sorry. We did not have you flagged." Behind me, I heard the car door open. I heard my brother stop laughing, and I stayed on one knee a moment longer with my arms around Argo's neck because the truth had finally walked across the lane on its own 4 legs and leaned against me. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to stand up and explain myself to anybody. The gate stayed at attention for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then Sergeant Major Frawley released them, quietly, and the morning flow resumed around us, and I got to my feet with one hand still on Argo's head, because he would not be parted from me, and I looked at my family. My father had gotten out of the car. He was standing by the open door, very straight in the way old Marines stand without deciding to, and he was looking at the dog leaning on my leg, and the sergeant major standing at respectful attention, and the young lance corporal, frozen with my bag still half open in his hands. And I watched my father try to fit what he was seeing into the picture of me he had carried for 27 years, and I watched the picture fail to hold it. Frawley insisted on escorting us through personally. He walked beside me, Argo glued to my left leg the whole way, the corporal trailing behind with an expression of a man whose entire morning had been rewritten. In the car, as we drove the last half-mile to the visitor building, nobody spoke for a long time. Then Hayden, from the front seat, said, in a voice with all the salesman drained out of it, "Okay, so the dog likes you. That is actually kind of cool." My mother turned around from the passenger seat. She had her hand pressed flat against her chest. "You never told us," she said. "You never told us you ran all this." And I almost laughed, because of course I had told them. I had told them for years, in phone calls they treated as background noise, in stories that ended in the dog lady joke. I had told them the whole time. They had simply decided long ago what I was, and a person can tell you the truth 100 times, and you will not hear it until something you cannot argue with says it for them. It had taken a dog, after everything, after the rank and the program and the 27 years, it had taken an old dog leaving his post to make my family hear a single sentence I had been saying for a decade. That evening, I sat alone in the visitor building and called Tessa Lund. Tessa had been my friend since we were both lieutenants, too junior to know how the Corps really worked, and she was retired now, a colonel like me, and she was the one person alive who knew the whole shape of my family and my career and the long, quiet cost of holding both. I told her what had happened at the gate. I expected her to laugh or to be moved, and she was a little of both. But then she was quiet, and then she said the thing I had called her, without admitting it, to hear. "Maren," she said, "you certified that dog with your own hands, and then you spent 10 years letting them call you the dog lady. The dog remembered who you were. When are you going to?" I did not have an answer. I sat with the phone against my ear and looked at the dress blues I had laid out across the bunk for the ceremony, the colonel's eagles, the ribbons, 27 years of a life pressed flat on a green blanket. And I understood that I had walked into this weekend still hoping my father would hand me my worth, when the truth was that no one was ever going to hand it to me, least of all him. I had built it. It existed whether he acknowledged it or not. The kennel existed. The program existed. The dogs and the handlers and the lives, quietly saved, all existed. Argo existed, gray in the muzzle, and certain of me. The only person who had ever made my worth conditional on my father's approval was me. I had confused keeping the peace with keeping my place. They were not the same thing, and the dog had just shown everyone the difference in front of the whole gate. I sat with that for a long time in the quiet of the billeting room. I thought about all the moments I could have spoken up and chose not to, and I tried to be honest with myself about why. It was not really about my family's comfort, though that is the story I had always told myself. It was about a fear so old I had stopped noticing it, the fear that if I stood up and named what I was, my father would look at me and still not see it. And that would be worse than never standing up at all. As long as I stayed small, I could believe his blindness was a choice he might one day reverse. If I stood at my full height and he still looked through me, then I would have to accept that the thing I had wanted since I was 11 was never going to come. And some part of me had decided that a hope deferred was easier to live with than a hope denied. That is the trap, I think, that catches so many of us. We keep ourselves small to protect a hope, and the smallness becomes the cage, and we mistake the cage for peace. The dog had not made that calculation. Argo had simply known what was true and acted on it, instantly, completely, with no fear of how it would be received. I was 49 years old, and an old working dog had more courage about the truth of me than I had ever allowed myself. I could not sit still after that call, so I walked. The base at dusk was familiar in my body in a way 10 years had not erased, and my feet took me to the kennels without my deciding to go. The new complex stood dark and finished, waiting for its dedication, and beside it the old runs were still in use, and in one of them was Argo. He came to the fence the instant he caught my scent, that broken, overjoyed sound rising in his throat again, and the young corporal from the gate, Barrett, was there finishing the evening feed. He told me they could not get the old dog to retire. "The kennel master keeps trying, ma'am," Barrett said, signs the paperwork, stands him down, and the next morning the old man reports for the gate, anyway. Will not be told. We let him work a light schedule because honestly, nobody has the heart to tell him no. I stood at the fence with my fingers through the chain link and Argo's muzzle pressed against them, and I thought about an animal who had decided 12 years ago that a job mattered because I had taught it to him, and who had kept reporting for that job long after anyone would have blamed him for resting. He had more loyalty to the thing we built than my own family had ever shown to me. He had also, I realized, more loyalty to it than I had lately shown to myself. I slept badly and woke early with 2 decisions already made, the way you sometimes wake with the hard part done in your sleep. The first was that I was finished translating my career into a language my family found acceptable. The second was that I was not going to let a 20-year-old lance corporal become the casualty of my reckoning. I went to the provost office before the ceremony, and Sergeant Major Frawley was already there, and he was angry on my behalf in the controlled way of a senior enlisted Marine. He wanted to formally counsel Lance Corporal Pryor. He had the incident written up already, the failure to recognize a senior officer, the whole thing documented and ready to follow that young man through his record. I read it, and I set it down, and I told him no. He did his job by the book, I said. The book just did not have my name in it, because I was in civilian clothes with my identification in my bag and no flag on the visit list. That is a staff failure, Sergeant Major, not his. He was thorough. Thorough is what we trained this gate to be. Let me handle the rest. Frawley did not like it, but he had come up under me, and he knew the difference between an order and a request, and he knew this was both. So they brought Lance Corporal Pryor to me, and he stood in front of me at a rigid, terrified attention, a young man who had spent the night learning exactly who he had pulled out of line, and I let him stand there for 1 second, and then I told him to stand at ease. He could barely do it. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice cracked. "Ma'am, I treated you like you did not belong here." I looked at him for a moment. He was 20. He was younger than the program. He had a whole career in front of him and the capacity, I could see, to be either ruined by this morning or shaped by it. "You did," I said. "And here's what I want you to take from it, because I am not going to take anything else from you. I built the working dog program on this installation. That dog who left his post for me at your gate was the first dog I ever certified 12 years ago with my own hands. None of that was visible to you this morning, and you stopped me anyway. And being thorough at a gate is not the sin. The sin is contempt. You did not check my credential, Lance Corporal. You decided my person. Learn the difference between those two things, and you will be worth something to this corps. Keep them confused, and you will spend your career making this morning's mistake over and over with people who cannot forgive you the way I am about to. He was crying a little, trying not to, the way young Marines do. Yes, ma'am, he said. I dismissed him, and he went, and I believed, watching him go, that I had done more good with that conversation than I would have done by ending him, and I still believe it. Then I went to breakfast where my family was waiting, and I did the harder thing. I sat down across from my father, and I told him, evenly, with no heat in it, that I was finished being introduced as the dog lady. I told him I had built something that mattered, that the Corps was about to put my name on it in cut stone, and that I would not spend another 27 years pretending to be small so that his picture of the world could stay simple. My father is not a man who absorbs a thing like that gracefully. He bristled. He reached for the old creed, the line companies, and the real Corps, and the joke that was only ever a joke. You are making a thing, he said, out of a thing that was never serious. It stopped being a joke, I said, the year you let a stranger believe it. The year you introduced me to your friends as a woman who plays with dogs and let them walk away thinking that was the whole of me. I let you do it because I thought keeping the peace was my job. It was not my job. It was just my fear. I am done. He did not answer. He held his coffee cup and did not drink from it, and my mother looked between us with her hand near her throat. And Hayden stared at his plate. I had never spoken to my father that way in my life. I was 49 years old, and it was the first time. The silence was not comfortable. But it was honest, and honest was new. And I found that I could sit inside it without needing to fill it or fix it or apologize for it. Word of the gate had traveled the way everything travels on a base overnight. By the time we walked toward the ceremony, every Marine we passed knew who I was. The colonel whose dog had left his post, and they looked at me with a recognition my family was watching in real time. The general's aide found me to confirm details and called me ma'am with a deference my father could not miss. Young handlers nodded as I passed. My family walked through a morning in which the entire installation, hundreds of Marines, treated me as someone who mattered, and the contrast with the dinner table they had built around me for 27 years was not something I had to point out. The base pointed it out for me, with every salute and every ma'am, and I did not have to lift a finger. My father went quiet in a way I had not seen before. Not sulking exactly. Something more unsettled than that. He had spent 50 years certain he knew what a Marine looked like, and he had just watched one get found by a dog's memory at a gate. And the Marine was not him, and the Marine was the daughter he had filed away as support in 1999 and never refiled. A man does not rebuild 50 years of certainty in a morning. But I watched the first cracks run through it, and I did not rush to patch them. Some things have to come apart before anything truer can stand where they were. He skipped the base tour that the general's staff had arranged, said his back hurt, which was true, and also was not the whole reason. He sat in the shade and watched from a distance while his daughter was shown her own legacy by Marines who treated that legacy as established fact, and I let him sit with it. I had spent my life managing his comfort. I was finished managing his comfort. If the truth was uncomfortable for him, that was the truth's job, not mine. Hayden found me alone near the kennels in the late morning. He had the look of a man doing arithmetic he had been avoiding for years. He started to make a joke. I saw it form and die on his face. And then he just said it plainly. I called you the dog lady at my own wedding, he said, in the toast, to make people laugh. And you paid for half that wedding. I never put those two things in the same room before. I know, I said. I was there for both. He flinched. He deserved to. But I was not trying to wound him, and he could tell, and that mattered. There is a kind of honesty that is just cruelty with better aim, and I had no use for it. I had carried this family for a long time, and I was not going to set the load down by throwing it at them. I was just going to set it down. "You are my brother," I told him. "I am not closing the door on you, but I am done being the bank and the punchline. You can have a sister. You cannot have a servant who also lets you laugh at her." "Pick." He nodded. He did not trust his voice. We stood there a while by the runs, and Argo watched us through the fence. And for the first time in our adult lives, my brother and I were quiet together, without the quiet being a weapon. I spent that afternoon in the kennels because that was where I wanted to be, and because I had finally learned to go where I wanted to be. The current handlers gathered around without quite meaning to, young Marines who ran the program now, and they asked me questions about the early days, the rebuild, the way things used to be done. One of them, a nervous young Marine barely out of training, told me something that undid me a little. "Whoever started this kennel, ma'am," he said, not knowing. "Half of us enlisted because of how it is talked about. It has a reputation. People come into the Corps wanting to end up here." He did not know he was talking to her. I did not correct him right away. I just said, "Then she would be glad you stayed." I asked him why he had chosen the dogs when there were 100 other jobs in the Corps that came with more glory and faster promotions. He thought about it, and then he told me about his uncle, who had been a handler decades ago, and a story his uncle used to tell about a dog that had pulled him out of a collapsed building by his collar when he was too dazed to move. He said he had grown up wanting to be the person a dog like that would do that for. And then he looked a little embarrassed, the way young men do when they admit to wanting something soft, and he said, "People think it is about the dogs being weapons, ma'am, but it is not. It is about being trusted by something that does not have to trust you." I had to look away for a moment when he said that, because he had described, without knowing it, the exact thing I had given my life to, and the exact thing my own family had never once offered me. A young Marine who did not know my name had just explained me to myself better than I had ever managed. I told him to hold on to that reason, because the day the job became about anything else was the day he should leave it. He promised he would. I believed him, and later, when someone told him, I heard from across the kennel the sound of a young man realizing he had said that to the founder's face. And I caught his eye and smiled so he would know it was the best thing anyone had said to me in a decade. My legacy was not the stone they were about to unveil. It was him and the others like him, standing in a kennel I built, keeping a promise I had made to a program before some of them were born. My mother came to me that evening with a folder. She'd carried it all the way from home, 4 hours in the car, and never said a word about it until then. It was worn soft at the edges, and inside it was every promotion notice, every clipping, every official announcement of every step of my career, going back to 1999. She had kept them all. She had kept them in secret for 27 years because she had been afraid of what my father would say if she put them on the table. "I have every one of them," she said, and her hands were shaking. "I just never knew how to put them on the table." "Your father, I told myself it was easier to keep the peace. She looked at me, and I saw that she knew, that she had always known, and that knowing without acting had cost her something too. "I am sorry," she said. "I should have made a place for them. For you. I should have made him look." I took the folder, 27 years of my life, kept in the dark by a woman who loved me and was afraid, was now sliding across a motel table into my hands 10 years too late and exactly on time. I did not have it in me to be angry at her. We had both spent our lives keeping a peace that was really just a fear, and we had both just been shown by a dog what it cost. I put my hand over hers. "We will put them on the table now," I said. "All of them. Together." The repair, when it started, was slow and clumsy and real, which is the only kind of repair worth anything. My father came to find me at the kennels the next morning, the morning of the dedication, before the formality started. He was gruff, and he could not look at me directly, and he asked, in the closest thing to humility I had ever heard from him, whether I would walk him through the place, show him what it was, what I had actually done. So I did. I walked my father, the infantry sergeant major, through a working dog kennel, and I showed him the training course and the certification standards and the medical suite and the records of the dogs who had gone downrange and come home, and the dogs who had gone downrange and saved Marines and not come home. And I watched something happen to him that I had waited my whole life to see. He recognized it. In the discipline of the dogs, in the precision of the training, in the seriousness of the young handlers, he saw the corps he had loved, the real corps, the one he thought only existed in line companies. "This is," he said, and stopped, and started again. "This is real training." I did not picture it like this. "You never asked to," I said. There was no cruelty in it. It was just the fact. He took it like a man taking a wound he knew he had earned, and he nodded, and we kept walking. Lance Corporal Pryor was at the kennel too that morning, which surprised me. He had volunteered to help with the dedication, and he had asked the handlers to teach him the history of the program, the names of the dogs who had come through. He found me and stood at a careful attention and asked if it was all right, ma'am, whether I would tell him the names of every dog that had been certified here from the beginning. He wanted to learn the gate he stood as something he was a steward of, not something he had power over. I told him I would write them down for him myself. He was going to be a good Marine. He had needed one bad morning to start becoming one, and I was glad I had let him keep his career so he could. Brigadier General Wade Holloway found me before the ceremony to ask a quiet question. He had heard about the gate, of course. He wanted to know whether the old dog should be part of the dedication. "That dog made you findable yesterday, Colonel," he said, with the smallest smile. "When your own gate could not. It seems right he should be on the program today." I said yes. Of course I said yes. Frawley would handle it, and Frawley told me, with total confidence, that Argo would do it. "He will walk out for you, ma'am," the sergeant major said. "He will not do it for anybody else on this base, but he will do it for you." The morning of the dedication, I put on my dress blues, and my family saw me for the first time in 27 years as a Marine. They had never seen me in blues. Not at my commissioning, where I wore them, but they saw only the daughter who had settled for the police side. Not since. And now I stood in the full dress blue of a United States Marine Corps colonel, the eagles bright on my shoulders, the ribbons of 27 years across my chest, the bearing I had never once shown at their dinner table, because their dinner table had never been a place I was allowed to stand at my full height. My mother put her hand over her mouth like she was meeting someone new. In a way, she was. I had never let them see this person. I had always made myself smaller to fit the room they kept for me. I was not going to do that anymore. My father stood at the edge of the gathering crowd, apart, in his own old retired Marine bearing. And I could see him wrestling with whether he was allowed to be proud, whether pride now would be a betrayal of 50 years of certainty or the first honest thing he had felt about me in decades. I did not go to him. I had spent my life crossing the distance to my father. If this distance was going to close, he was going to have to cross it himself. Frawley confirmed the order of ceremony and told me again, gently, that the old dog was ready. "He will do it for you, ma'am," he said. And I stood looking at the new building, the finished complex with its empty stones still covered, the young handlers in their formation, the gray-muzzled dog waiting at the front of it who had left his post for me, my family scattered through the crowd in various states of reckoning. And I realized I did not know how the next hour would go. I did not know what the building would be named. I did not know if my father would cross the distance. Everything I had built was about to have my answer carved on it in stone. And I still did not know if the man who raised me would be able to look at it. The formation came together in the spring morning, the handlers and their dogs in their ranks, and at the front, alone, an old Belgian Malinois sat and waited, off duty for the first time in his life, and somehow still the most disciplined creature on the field. And a question I had carried since I was 11 years old hung in the clear air over all of it. Brigadier General Holloway spoke, and then it was time for the unveiling, and the cover came off the stone. The complex was named for the program, and below the name of the program, cut into the stone where every handler and every dog and every Marine who passed through that gate for the next 50 years would read it, was a line that named me as its founder. Colonel Marin Whitfield. Founder. The woman who built this from nothing. It was there in stone, permanent, the way my father's creed had once felt, permanent, except this was true and this would outlast both of us. The general read a short citation. "Every dog that walks out of this gate from now on," he said, "walks out of something Colonel Whitfield built from nothing, when the easier thing, the thing almost anyone else would have done, was to let it die." I stood at attention and let the words land, and I did not shrink from them, and that not shrinking was its own kind of ceremony, private, just for me. He went on, and his voice carried across the field. He spoke about what a program like this one actually means, not in the language of budgets and certifications, but in the language of the people and the animals who pass through it. He talked about the Marines who had enlisted because of its reputation and stayed because of its standards. He talked about the dogs who had gone to hard places and the patrols that had come home whole because of them. He said that a legacy is not a building and it is not a name on a stone, that those are only markers. A legacy, he said, is the thing that keeps running after the person who started it has gone, the standard that holds without them in the room, the trust that gets handed down from one Marine to the next like a round being passed up a line. By that measure, he said, looking at me, Colonel Whitfield's legacy has been operational on this installation for 10 years already, and it will be operational long after every one of us standing here has retired. I had spent 27 years being told, gently and not so gently, that what I did was not the real core. A general officer was now telling several hundred Marines that it was the realest thing there is, the part that outlasts you. I kept my bearing, but something in my chest that had been clenched since I was 11 years old finally, quietly, let go. Then Frawley gave a low command, and Argo was walked out. The old dog came to the front for the unveiling, steady on his stiff legs, doing one last job because the Corps had asked him to, and because, I think, he understood in whatever way a dog understands that this day was about the thing he and I had made together. He held his place in the formation for almost a full minute, gray and dignified and good. And then he broke it. He left the formation the way he had left his post at the gate, and he crossed the open ground to where I stood at attention in my blues. And he sat down against my leg and leaned his whole weight into me. And the entire crowd, the general, the formation, my family, every Marine on that field, let it happen. Nobody called him back. Some things outrank discipline. He had left his post for me at the gate. At the kennel, in front of everyone, he decided that I was his post, that wherever I stood was the place he was meant to guard. I put my hand on his gray head, and I held my bearing, and I let the tears come without letting them break me, because there is a kind of crying that is not weakness. It is just a body finally allowed to feel the weight it has carried, and I had carried this one for 27 years. And then my father crossed the distance. He came out of the crowd, slow, his back clicking, an old infantry sergeant major in civilian clothes, and he walked up to me in front of the general and the formation and everyone, and he stopped at the proper distance, and he brought his hand up in a slow, correct, deliberate salute. He held it. A retired enlisted Marine, saluting his daughter the colonel in public, with the whole base watching. And then he dropped the salute, and the formality went out of him all at once. And he was just my father, and he put his arms around me and the dog leaning between us, and he said, into my shoulder, in a voice I had never heard him use, I was wrong about what a Marine looks like. She was standing in my kitchen the whole time. I just never looked. I held my father and my dog at the same time, and 27 years rearranged themselves, not erased, never erased, but finally seen. The dedication ended the way these things do, in handshakes and photographs and the slow dispersal of a crowd. But the part I keep is later, at dusk, when the base had gone quiet and the formality had drained away, and I went back to the kennels in my blues with the jacket open. I sat down on the concrete floor of the run, in my dress uniform, not caring, and Argo lay down against me with his gray head in my lap, both of us off duty at last. Hayden came and found me there. He did not make a joke. He brought me a cup of coffee, and he set it down beside me on the concrete, and he sat for a while without saying anything, and then he went and let me be. Before he left, he put his hand on the old dog's head, awkwardly, the way a man touches something he is only beginning to understand the worth of. And he said, quietly, he is a good dog, and I knew he was not only talking about the dog. It was the closest my brother could come, that evening, to saying he was sorry. And I took it for what it was, and it was enough. I sat with my old dog in the dark and thought about all of it. The kitchen table where I was filed away at 11. The handshake at my commissioning, the decade of being the dog lady in the bank, the folder my mother kept in the dark for 27 years, and a gate on a spring morning, and an animal who knew the truth about me before any human there would let themselves see it, and who loved me enough to leave his post and say so. Here is what I want you to take from this. whoever you are, wherever you are listening. If the people who were supposed to know you best have decided you are smaller than you are, you do not have to shout to correct them. You do not have to perform your worth or argue for it or earn it one more time. You just have to keep building the true thing, the real thing, the thing only you can see the point of, and you have to stop making yourself small to fit the room they keep for you. Stand at your full height. Let the truth do its own work. Because one day, when you least expect it, the thing you built will speak for you. It will walk 12 feet across a guarded lane in front of everyone who ever doubted you, and it will lean its whole weight against your leg, and it will not move, and then they will all have to look, and you will already know what they are only just learning. You will have known it the whole time. I sat on that kennel floor in my dress blues with an old dog's head in my lap, and I understood that the truth had been mine the whole time, even when no one would look at it. If you have ever built something that mattered and watched the people closest to you call it nothing, I would really like to hear about it in the comments. Did someone in your life finally see you, and what was the moment that made them look? And do you think my father earned that salute, or was it 10 years too late? Tell me. I read everyone, and if this story stayed with you, hit subscribe and thank you for being here.